Canterbury has a local voice. It's Canterbury Mornings with Chris Lynch.
Who is going to pay for the CBD blueprint anchor projects? We were supposed to get the answer by the end of April. It never happened. Then there was supposed to be some sort of cost-sharing arrangement between the government and the council. That discussion appears to be ongoing. But Prime Minister John Key gave the strongest indication yet that the government isn't really too interested in coughing up too much cash for its own proposal. He says the council should look at potentially selling some of its assets to pay for anchor projects. He said that on First Line a couple of days ago. The Prime Minister is on the phone and joins me now. Good morning to you.
Morning, Chris.
Appreciate your time this morning. There is genuine concern, isn't there, that the council is taking on too much debt, therefore a partial asset sale is a good solution.
I mean, in the end, all of that's for Cantabrians. I mean, I don't think you can actually say that the government's not either prepared to step up or isn't backing, the projects in Christchurch. I mean, we're in for $15 billion, basically. And, when you think that's $15 billion out of the $40 billion of which the bulk of the rest of it's paid for by insurance, the government's been putting its best foot forward. And in terms of the anchor projects, I mean, we're funding essentially 100% of the hospital projects, which both the main Christchurch Hospital and Burwood Hospital, $650 million in there, and another $700 million in the budget alone out of the $2.1 billion that we allocated for Christchurch. Goes into the Justice Precinct, which is also in the CBD area.
But what you're suggesting, Prime Minister, is that one of the only options left, I guess, could be for the council to sell off some of its partial assets, though.
Well, this is the way I would look at it, is that there's a blueprint for Christchurch and there's 12 precincts, and those precincts are going to go ahead, in my view, and they'll be paid for in a variety of different forms. Some will be insurance payouts on the existing areas, some will be the government and some will be the council. What will ultimately, though, be required is at some point Christchurch is going to need to decide, okay, well, do I want to have, kind of the gold-plated version of some of these precincts, or do I want to leave them in a more basic form? So if we take the stadium, for example, there's a wide range there, isn't there, from a nice basic stadium right through to a covered stadium, absolutely cutting edge. Now, in the end, Cantabrians might say, well, I'd rather own a few less airport shares and I'd prefer to have a covered stadium. Or they might say, look, I'd rather keep all the assets I've got and not change the mix at all. The point I would simply make is that there's really only a couple of ways of paying for these things. One is the ratepayer pays more through their rates. And there's got to be a limit to how much can be put on the poor old ratepayer of Christchurch. The second is that they, find alternative forms, and that's either sale of assets or more debt. But again, there's got to be a limit to how much debt they put on. Or the third is the projects don't go ahead, or the fourth is the government pays the lot.
But why would the council want to sell? Why would the council want to sell off some of its biggest money-making earners to fund loss-making ventures like convention centres and stadiums? With the greatest respect, that's insane.
Not necessarily. It depends on a number of different factors. I mean, for a start off with convention centres, I mean, my view on them, which is very important. On the other side of the coin, having commercial partners makes a hell of a lot of sense, which is exactly why in Auckland I pushed pretty hard for us to do a deal with Sky City. Because I didn't think the government should be putting in $400 million, nor the ratepayer. I thought it was far better and more logical to do it in that way. So I don't disagree with you that finding partners to do something like a convention centre might be an eminently sensible thing to do. That's, again, a matter for those who are putting them all together. But if you go and have a look at, essentially the sale of or partial sale of some assets, I mean, that's really what the government's been doing in relation to Mighty River Power and soon to be Meridian, to put into other assets that we want, changing the mix. Now, you might say that's a bad option. Well, that's for Cantabrians to decide. But, all options, have consequences. More debt means more costs for the ratepayer and less than you can do in the future. Bigger rate bills means, you less again for the consumer at home. So they're all options you've got to think about.
Prime Minister, I'm interested. You keep saying this is for Cantabrians to decide, but isn't this already being decided by the CCDU? I mean, what voice do we really have when it comes to deciding of what kind of anchor projects that we actually want?
Well, the blueprint has been decided and signed off by everyone, and the government essentially is playing a facilitating role in acquiring the land for that, working with Sarah and the likes. Now, I don't think that's overly contentious myself. I might be wrong, but my understanding when we launched the thing was it was too much fanfare, and it was widely accepted and proclaimed as the right thing to do for Christchurch. Personally, I think Christchurch, if it builds that CBD with those precincts, will be, arguably the most livable city in New Zealand, if not Australasia, because you will have fabulous facilities all in a confined space. And your old CBD was really struggling because it was spread out, and like any city that evolves as opposed to one that can be planned, it's much more difficult to live in. You've got potentially out of adversity a great opportunity here. So I mean, but there is a lot of decisions that Cantabrians can make around the structure of those precincts and their projects. I mean, as you pointed out before, whether ultimately you have partners in there, commercial or otherwise, whether you develop to a certain standard and the timing of those developments are all in the hands of Cantabrians.
See, I think that the Sky City deal makes sense because obviously, it's a bigger population. They want more pokies. They got that. The driver there will be the tourism dollar. And it's interesting, Prime Minister, the hotel sector here argues that a convention centre brings in the tourism dollars. But I do wonder, if they are so right, why are we not seeing any private investment coming to Christchurch, any new private investment, particularly for things like stadiums or convention centres?
Well, I don't know the answer to that because I haven't actually been intimately myself working on those projects, and I haven't seen any advice on that. I mean, having said that, I'm there, and I'm literally coming to Christchurch, and it's all clear at the moment, but I'm coming to Christchurch in the next couple of hours. I'm there a lot, and it does strike me that there are lots of potential investors who are interested. I mean, one of the big issues is putting a bit of certainty around the development of these precincts. I mean, there are plenty of contractors who want to do the work. I think quite a lot of investors who are happy to invest. It's been a long process, and I think everyone understands and appreciates that there's real reasons for that. But and certainly from the government's perspective, I know that Jerry Brownlee is very focused on trying to get all the moving parts buttoned down so we can get progress, investors can come in. I don't think they'll stay away forever. I mean, look at Queenstown. They're in the process at the moment of putting together a convention centre where the Crown may have to make a small contribution, but I mean, overall it's been funded through a combination of the ratepayer, through other operators, private sector operators, and the council and the government.
I know you've got to jump on the plane, so I'll just ask one last question. When can we get some clarity from the government as to how much money they are prepared to stump up to the CBD anchor projects?
Well, it'll be project by project, and as I say, in some cases it'll be 100% funded. In some cases it would make no sense to do that because it will depend on issues like what the insurance payout is. But I mean, for instance, around things like the convention centre, I mean, my understanding is that the council's doing a fair bit of work about whether the town hall in that area is savable. Now, I don't, again, proclaim to have the understanding of that, but I guess if the council ultimately ruled it was and wanted to put its insurance payout, which is significant, into that, then in the end that's again a matter for the Christchurch Council and the people that elect them. It's not really for the government. We're not there to dictate to people, but we are trying to play a facilitating role and do the best we can to put Christchurch back on its feet.
Prime Minister John Key, really appreciate your time this morning.